Hi there, I'm Simon Austin Beckett. This is Winston. I'm a training dog behaviourist, and today we're going to be talking about what may be causing sudden changes in your dog's behaviour. Now, from the stack of books that I've read, from the coursework that I have done, from the essays I have written, and I'm pretty sure it's probably not going to be a mystery to anybody that's watching, there are an endless number of reasons why our dog's behaviour may change, be that suddenly or notably over a short period of time. For example, it could be a very complex issue that has stemmed from many years of maltreatment. They may have been abandoned or have abandonment issues, anxiety, things like that. Or it could be something very simple. It could be a physical injury. Winston, yesterday, cut his pad, and he has been like this ever since. You would think that he'd had the worst news of his life. I assure you it needs no medical attention, but that's the power of pain for you. Uh, like any intelligent animal, they are very much, our dogs, the product of the physical, the physiological, and the psychological experiences that they have and that they encounter throughout their lives. On the surface, a behavioural problem, therefore, may seem to be relatively straightforward. Let's take the example of a dog barking at somebody at the front door. We think that it's just the dog simply exhibiting those sort of protective behaviours. Stranger at the door, the dog may feel slightly territorial, dog barks because of the situation that's occurring in front of them, right? Sounds pretty simple, yeah? And that's not to say that's not the case. It may exactly be that. It may be the dog itself is a little territorial and it is a little, anxious of strangers or visitors. But it's not possible to make an absolute certain that the behaviour is the result of the cause, such as what I've described there, without looking into not just what the dog is doing, barking at the visitor at the door, but potentially why they are doing it and when they are doing it, and what condition is the dog in when the dog is exhibiting that behavior. For example, does the dog do that anytime? Anytime somebody comes to the door, anytime somebody walks past the house, the dog has the moment that we're talking of, the barking, the aggressive tendencies, the get away, go away, don't want you here sort of thing. Or does it happen more often in the morning only? Perhaps it's a short period of time after the dog has woken when maybe the postman is likely to swing by. Does it happen mostly in the evening before the dog has eaten or after the dog has eaten? Has the dog always done it? Did it start, increase, or get worse as the dog has become older? You then have to look at things like sex. Is the dog a bitch in season? Or are they suffering some other ailment at that point in time, or have been suffering a certain ailment for a period of time when that behaviour has started to exhibit itself? So already we see the action, the dog barking, at the cause, the person at the door, and then the behaviour that follows that we assume is a result of 1 plus 1. But we first have to look at when, why, and what else could be causing that situation before we even worry about what that actual situation itself is at that point in time. So very quickly, we begin to see the sheer complexity that trying to understand a relatively simple behaviour may uncover. As we scratch the surface of the behaviour and we find the different components of it and the different layers that sit behind it, it then begins to question for us whether it is literally 1 plus 1 equals 2, or whether there's certain things that are part of one, the behaviour, that cause it to react to part two, the stimulus, and therefore gives us a very different reason for why the whole process is beginning in the first place. And before we do that, though, before we start essentially picking it apart and trying to break it down to its component parts, we first need to understand if there is something else at play. And when I say something else, what I mean is there a physiological part of this that is causing these things to manifest as they are manifesting themselves? If the behavioural change has been very sudden, and I'm talking literally, it may have just been the very next day, or over the course of a few days, it could very much suggest, as my dear Winston is exhibiting for us here, that something biological has changed, and something in the biology of the dog has been affected, positively or negatively. It could be a pain, or it could be a stimulus, but either way, something biological is affecting the dog, and that is therefore resulting in the behavioral change. I've used the example of the dog barking the door, but you could be talking to anything. The dog, as an example, may suddenly start to take themselves off into different areas of the house, and is trying to avoid people. The dog may suddenly become very interested in something in your garden, and very interested in a certain spot or a place, or doing a certain behavior, whether it's running around in tight circles, or jumping up and down, or trying to escape, or anything. If it's a sudden change over a very short period of time, some sort of stimulus or some sort of affliction may be exasperating that on your dog, and therefore has caused the sudden change. We can appreciate this, right? I mean, as us humans, we know what it's like when you're feeling a little under the weather. If you're feeling a bit sick, we become more lethargic. We're less responsive to other people. We're less responsive to other stimuluses. If there's things that normally would interest us that we're not, that no longer is of interest to us, and we don't react in the same way, we become, if we're feeling particularly poorly, or particularly if we have a pain or something, we become quite short-tempered, as we battle through. Dogs are very similar. The trick that dogs have, which is not something that we suffer for, is if we feel pain, or we feel afflicted, or we feel down, or or something's affecting us in a way, we can explain it, we can describe it, we can communicate that to other people around us, or to somebody that we think might be able to help us. We're able to communicate that malady that we have, so that people understand the behavior very quickly. And we probably, as the creatures that we are, can usually sort of decipher exactly why we might be snapping or snappy at people, because we know that we're feeling under there. The trick we have with our dogs is that when they feel down, as Winston is unfortunately today, with the slightest cut to his foot, he just goes very quiet. And no amount of me asking him is going to get an answer from him. The only way I found out that when Winston was, after our walk, when he's usually quite buoyant and he's quite, brisk and quite happy in himself, after our walk, when we got back, I noticed he wasn't. And it was only at the point that he sort of laid down and started licking his pad, that I noticed that was the reason why. And then, as I say, he's been Mr. Happy ever since. So as I say, so the trick is that dogs cannot tell us when they're not feeling their best. I know that seems like an obvious statement, but it's an important one to be aware of, that, if the dog suddenly does change, don't expect there to be an obvious explanation as to why. So we need to look for those sort of subtle changes in their behavior. Sometimes they're not so subtle. As I say, Winston was licking his pad. That was fairly obvious, therefore, that there was something bothering him. So I could decipher the obvious, that was, causing him to feel a bit sorry for himself. Sometimes these things are much more subtle than that. If you have a generally quiet or quite, muted dog anyway, that's quite chilled, to come down a layer below that, you may not necessarily notice it at first. Maybe the dog takes an extra, half an hour to get interested in the morning, or to come downstairs if he sleeps upstairs, or whatever it is. So it may be a much more subtle changing their behavior that you may not immediately be able to spot. And in all instances, before you go to town on trying to resolve a behavioural problem or a behavioural shift that you've seen, especially if it's something as immediate as we're discussing here today, so if it's, from day one to day two, there's been a complete change, before you even speak to people like me, or you look for that sort of outside help from a behaviourist, or you try and do some self-diagnosis, speak to a vet. Always speak to a vet, because if it's a biological component, you have to, necessitate reason. If it's as obvious it is with Winston, he's got a cut to his pad. I've assessed the pad. It's it really is. It's really not noticeable. But in every instance, if the behavioural change is as sudden as that, it's probably a biological or physiological change in the dog for some reason or another. He may have eaten something, he may have injured somewhere, or something that is not immediately obvious to you. You should always speak to a vet first to look for those underlying health issues, just in case, before you go to town on any behavioural training or assessments. Okay. And then, just to give you the other side of it, just as a sort of footnote on the point, it's also important to be aware that although it's rare, a change in behaviour could also be the result of medical treatment. Certain drugs, certain chemicals can also alter the behaviour of our dogs, which, you know, certain times it's actually the purpose of it, right? But just to be aware that even some normal everyday medications can have an effect on our dogs and can affect different dogs in different ways. This is a great book, by the way. This is John Fisher, Think Dog. He actually speaks in here of a situation with a Weimaraner that was given cortisone injections for treatment of a rash. Very simple, straightforward. He says that the dog's behaviour shifted quite dramatically over a very short period of time. The dog became very aggressive to other dogs, to other people. Nobody at that point could quite work out what had changed. The two hadn't been put together. And they assumed it was because of the dog's age. The dog was young. As he was growing quite rapidly, they thought that maybe it was just him sort of pushing his boundaries and testing his boundaries. Once the cortisone injections were stopped, John Fisher says that the behaviour literally switched off like a tap. So just an important footnote there that, you know, absolutely see a vet. Always see a vet first whenever you're concerned about anything to do with your dog's behavioural changes, whatever it might be. But just be also conscious that if you are then prescribed anything for anything, keep an eye on your dogs for a period of time thereafter, just to make sure that, you know, that everything looks normal. And if it doesn't, go and speak to your vet. Always speak to your vet. Really straightforward, this one. Then that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So as I say, look at if your dog's behaviour has shifted over a long period of time, and it has been sort of a gradual degradation, or it not even, you know, not even to say things get worse, but just change over a period of time. It's probably more of a psychological thing where they're being affected by something day in, day out. If, however, the change in your dog's behaviour is very short, and we're talking over a matter of, I mean, this could even be over a matter of hours, but realistically over a day or two, there's possibly a biological component there. There's something physiological that's affecting the dog that was not affecting the dog prior to this behavioural change. And as I say, those behavioural changes can be good or bad. It might be like Mr. Sorry for himself here. He feels lethargic. He feels a bit sorry for himself because he's got a cut to his pad. If your dog has sniffed or absorbed something, some sort of stimulus, the behaviour might shift the other way. They might become incredibly lively, incredibly active, reactive to things. So again, sudden changes in behaviour suggest a biological component. If you have any concerns, speak to your vet. That is it. I said this was going to be a shorter one, but I've just looked at the clock and I'm pretty sure that this is the longest one so far. So thank you for sticking with me as always. I would love it if you could come and let me know what you think of these videos. It's really important to me, and obviously to Winston, as you can see, he cares. It's really important to know that these are sort of interesting, and if they're not, that's equally important to know. So do please feel free to let me. My website is dogsgowoof.co.uk. It's going to be appearing up here somewhere. Very active on Facebook, as I've mentioned before, Dogs Go With UK. And then if you want something a bit more about us, about our lives, you've got Instagram, you've got _ Simon Winston _ and I also have a Dogs Go With Instagram as well, _ Dogs Go With _ that is everything. Have a lovely day. I will speak to you all very soon. Thank you for watching. Cheers very much. Winston sat up. Maybe we're over this problem. You never know. Oh no, he wanted to burp. Anyway, there you go. Nice to see you. Bye.